You know, Rebels, if you've been checking out some of my promotional ads on social media, you'll be aware that I have been using a lot of AI programs to help me create ads. But you know what? There's a lot more uses for AI than just funny little videos. And I'd like to introduce one of our new sponsors, Podium. It is a leader in creating AI tools for podcasters. Now, let's say you've got a podcast, or maybe you're even thinking of doing a podcast. You're probably wondering, well, how can AI be integrated with your workflow? I'll tell you about Podium. As a podcaster, you know that writing show notes and creating chapters and transcribing episodes takes a lot of time, and it can cost you a lot of money too. But you know what? That's where Podium comes in. It's an AI tool designed specifically for creators and podcasters with the goal of making post-production tasks quick and easy. And in just a few minutes, Podium generates show notes, chapters, summaries, clips for social media, a full transcript, suggested episode titles, social media posts, and more. Whew, that's a lot of work for one little program. Your show notes are key to your podcast's success because it helps new listeners find your podcast and they'll know if it's a fit for them. You know, kind of like Too Many Podcasts. It also improves your SEO, that's your search engine optimization. Ooh, big phrase there. And overall accessibility. And with Podium, you can focus on creating a great podcast and let Podium's AI do the heavy lifting. But Podium isn't just for solo creators and podcasters. It's a game changer for editors, producers, marketers, agencies, and production studios. Teams that use Podiums are able to increase workloads, decrease turnaround times, and improve their quality. How does it work? Very easy. First, go to Podium's website, and you'll see that link that's right there in the show notes. You get 3 hours free just to try it. Pretty cool, huh? And using that link also supports this show as well. And you know what else happens? Because I'm a good guy. You use my link, you will get 50% off for your first month. So visit the site, upload an MP3 file, and download your files, and that's it. And if you need anything else, you can use Podium GPT to generate articles and any marketing copy you might need in seconds. Instant show notes, transcripts, chapters for your podcast or channel. This will level up that podcast. So check out Podium today.
The Sherpa Screening Room is a presentation of Too Many Podcasts, which is brought to you in cooperation with the SJ Network. If you're someone who'd like to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. This show is hosted by Jim the Podcast Sherpa. With a name like that, you can't say I didn't warn you.
This week's guest on The Sherpa Screening Room is award-winning author and pop culture historian Tom Lisanti. Tom has written numerous books about the 60s and the 70s. I'm quite partial to 70s pop culture, myself. In fact, it's just coming into winter where I live, so I pitched a tent and put a disco ball inside. Because now is the winter of my disco tent.
Coming to you from Sherpa Chalet in beautiful downtown Mount Podcastia, it's time for entertainment interviews in the Sherpa Screening Room. Grab an aisle seat and a bucket of popcorn, but don't crunch too loud or you'll miss the show. Now, here's your host, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpolution, and welcome to the Sherpa Screening Room, a presentation of Too Many Podcasts. Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios, high atop Mount Podcastia, and these are the episodes, in case you've never heard them before, where we get to speak to the creators, and what a really interesting creator we have for you today. You know, a lot of people may argue that now is the golden age of movies and TV, and I don't know, there's a lot of options for people to check out. I would probably differ with that opinion because I think as far as creativity is concerned, probably the 60s and the 70s were probably the best era for movies and television. And you know what? Today's guest is an author, and he's a pop culture historian who has written about a dozen books about the movies and television of the 1960s and the 1970s. His name is Tom Lisanti, comes to us from New York City, and we had a really interesting conversation. And I guess growing up in that same era, it was easy to relate to all the stuff that he was talking about. And he's got an exciting new book out that you should check out, and we will give you his information in the show notes, of course, as we always do. But I think you're going to like this conversation. I found Tom to be really interesting. So let's get to it. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the Sherpa Screening Room. I'm hanging out today with Mr. Tom Lisanti, a fellow New Yorker, and he is an award-winning author who has published 12 books on the movies and television of the 1960s and the 1970s. His latest book is called Dueling Harlows, The Race to Bring the Actress's Life to the Silver Screen. Whew. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Now, where did this all start? Would you say that you were kind of obsessed with cinema and TV of the 60s and 70s?
Yes. As a kid during the 1960s, my dad and my mom would take us to the drive-in all the time, and in the late 60s. So, but we didn't go see like Disney movies. We went to see Planet of the Apes and Clint Eastwood's spaghetti westerns and Love Story and Patton and Paint Your Wagon. I remember. I saw my first pair of boobs when Brett Eklund stripped in The Night They Raided Minsky. So that's where I sort of got the love of film. And then in 1972, well, actually it was 1973, for my birthday, all I wanted to see was The Poseidon Adventure. It was the big movie, and I was like 12 years old. And they took me into the drive-in. I got to sit in the front seat, and I was mesmerized. It was nothing what I had seen before in the drive-in could compare to The Poseidon Adventure, with the turning over the boat and the big all-star cast. And I fell in love with Carol Lindley, who played the hippie singer. So that was sort of the start of my love for movies. But I became a fan of the movies first of the 1960s because, and if you grew up here in New York, you might remember the ABC 4:30 movie.
Absolutely.
And they would have Planet of the Apes Week, Gidget Week, Beach Party Week, and I loved watching all those. And I would finish school, do my paper out, and come zooming home to see what 30 movie. Not really realizing at the time that it was all pan and scan, and they cut those movies to shreds. You didn't really get to see the whole movie. So I started to become a fan of a lot of the not the big stars, but the lesser stars of the 50s, of the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And then I worked for the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. I started, I did write in college, but my father said, you have to have you need a real degree to get it, to work and, support yourself. So I kind of let the writing drift, and then I came back to it. And like I said, I was a big fan of Carol Lindley. A friend just happened to, who was a movie buff. He had a fanzine. He said, why don't you try to interview Carol for my fanzine? And I wrote her this big letter, and she said yes. And so I interviewed her, and then I published it actually with Film Facts magazine. It's a movie magazine. Unfortunately, I think it's folding this year. And from getting Carol Lindley, I started to get more people. I interviewed Pamela Tippin and Shelley Fabre and Diane McBain. I just started to grow and grow, and then I started to put them into books. And so the first book was Fantasy Films of 60s Cinema. I did it. One book was Drive-In Dream Girls. Another book was Hollywood Surf and Beach Movies, the first wave, 1959 to 69. So it just kind of snowballed after that. And actually, my friends would call me the starlet stalker. And they would say, if an actress got a letter or a phone call from me, they knew their career was over because I wanted to interview them. And so that's how it all began.
Was it weird for you as a writer when you got to really approach these actresses that you probably had admired their work on the screen, and all of a sudden you're talking to them in a completely different perspective, like really wondering what was going through their heads, when they were doing this movie and what was going on behind the scenes?
At the beginning, when I started doing this in the late 1990s, my friend lived out in LA, and I would go out there and I would interview them in person. So those early ones really stick out for me. Like I actually I interviewed Linda Harrison, who played Nova in the first two Planet of the Apes movies. And she was staying in her ex-husband's mansion. Well, actually, it was a guest house, and Richard Zanuck was her ex-husband. And I remember driving all the way up this, and this was a gated, I think it was in Bel Air, and pulling into this, it was like a circular driveway. And she came out and she said, well, we'll get into my Range Rover and go to lunch. We went to lunch and I interviewed her over lunch. And then she said, I have some errands. Do you mind coming with me? And I'm like, no. And we stopped at a drugstore so she could get cosmetics. And I'm standing there. She's trying on lipsticks. And I'm like, oh, my God, I'm cosmetic shopping with Nova. So the earlier ones where I did it a lot in person, I interviewed Irene Sue in her Beverly Hills home in person. I interviewed Jean Hale from St. Valentine's Day Massacre and in like Flint in her Pacific Palisades home. Diane McBain, who's in all those Warner Brothers movies like Claudel English and Parish, and she did a lot of TV. We met at Wolfgang Puck's restaurant in office on Sunset Boulevard. So those are more surreal for me than doing it on the phone. Which pretty much all my interviews after that have been all on the phone. So, but it's a little different when when you interview somebody in person and you're actually looking at the eye and you're like, oh my God, I'm sitting here with so and so. So yes, those stand out for me.
Absolutely. Before we did our interview, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, if you're going to pick an era in cinema, movies and TV, that the 60s and the 70s were probably the most interesting, I think, so far, because there was really a lot changing in society. Movies were changing, women's lib was going on. So you had a lot of, empowered women. There was just all this combination, even in the types of movies that were coming out. Like you mentioned, the Poseidon Adventure, where we had that little gap where there was, Earthquake, The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure. And even more like, even in horror, even in pornographic movies, it really started coming a little bit more to the mainstream. There was just so much. And even in this on television as well, where there was, I think, maybe like a little bit more liberal attitude to the shows that we did see on TV.
Yeah, the actresses from the 60s kind of went through a transition period. A lot of them started in the early 60s. And in the early 60s, it was still the 50s. It was still like Eisenhower. There was Gidget. There was beach, chase beach movies and stuff. But then as the 60s progressed, the studio system started to collapse. So a lot of these actresses who had like either picture deals or contracts were now freelance. Playboy was was coming up in the beginning. In the early 60s, you would get like either like a Jane Mansfield or like a foreign sex pot like Elke Summer or Ursula Andress to appear in Playboy semi-nude. But by the mid-60s, the American actresses were being Carol Baker, Carol Lindley started taking it off for Playboy, and that became an issue. A number of the actresses I interviewed were approached by Playboy, and they had a dilemma. They said, do I do it or I don't? And some of them did, and some of them decided not to. And then screen nudity too. Now by the late 60s, a lot of them said they were getting offered parts where they had to go topless and on the big screen. And like Pamela Tiffin said, I interviewed her, and she said I was a child of the 50s, and my mother and father would have been mortified if they would have seen me in the movies, with my top off. So they definitely were part of that transitional period. And then for me, as a kid, I mean, my 60s TV was all the fantasy stuff. I loved the Irwin Allen TV shows, Batman, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Here Come the Brides. It was all those, big color, shows, and more on the fantasy and comedic side. And then, like I said, we went to the movies a lot, and it kind of just into the 70s. Like I said, it was the 4:30 movie, which made me, because as a kid in the 60s, I knew the TV, but I really didn't know much about the movies at the time, other than the few that we saw in the drive-in. By the 4:30 movie is really my education on like popular movies of the 60s that I didn't see in the drive-in.
My favorite part of the 4:30 movie was Monster Week, and they always had Destroy All Monsters.
Yes.
With Mothra and Ghidra.
And if you were lucky, they would do the movie in 2 parts or 3 parts. Like sometimes like Judgment at Nuremberg would be all 5 days, and they did The Cardinal all 5 days. And there was becoming a Carol Lindley fan and a Pamela Tiffin fan, there was a movie called The Pleasure Seekers. with her, and then Anne Margaret was the third girl, about three girls looking for love and romance in Madrid, and they would show it chopped up one day. But I remember once it was a two-parter, and I was like, oh my God, I get to see the rest of the movie. I'm finally going to see most of the movie. Because it was only a 90-minute time slot, and I think the movies were cut down to 67 minutes, I think, something like that. So you didn't get
because of all the commercials and everything like that, right? Now, it's interesting that you've mentioned Carol Lindley's name a couple of times because she actually features in your latest book, in Dueling Harlows.
Yes. When it took me a while I did these other books with all these other actresses when in my mind, knowing I wanted to do one on Carol Lindley. And in 2010, I started it. And when I was doing the research she played Jean Harlow in a low budget black and white biopic called Harlow, which is different from the big budget color one from Paramount with Carol Baker. When I started to do the research, I was finding more and more interesting stuff about the war between the producers of the two movies, as they were trying to make. They were both. It was a real race. Who was going to get their movie out first? And my chapter kept growing and growing, and I thought, well, this might be interesting just as a standalone book, but I didn't think it would have much of a reach. So in 2010, even though I interviewed Carol Lindley, I interviewed her co-star Michael Dante, assistant director Richard Bennett, a fair number of people from the Carol Lindley Harlow. Unfortunately, I couldn't get many. Other than the assistant director Tim Zinnemann from the Carol Baker Harlow. Carol Baker turned me down for an interview, but I self-published it through Great Space, which is no longer in existence. It was via Amazon, and people bought it and they loved the content, but it wasn't professionally copy edited. I had to insert the photos myself and do all that, and I'm not very tech savvy, so It was shoddy, and I was very disappointed in it. And so, jumping forward, I thought, if I kind of want to redo it. And so I got new interviews. I actually did more research, and I took a different little approach. I added another movie. In the 70s, Lindsay Bloom played Jean Harlow in a low-budget movie called Hughes and Harlow, Angels in Hell, from director Larry Buchanan, who he just had a hit the year before with Misty Rowe playing Marilyn Monroe in Goodbye, Norma Jean. So he thought, well, I exploited Marilyn, let's exploit Jean Harlow. So I interviewed Lindsay and two people who worked on that movie for the new book. And then I also talked about some other stage performances where people have played Jean Harlow right after the two biopics. So I added more photos, and I cleaned it up. And then McFarlane and Company, that published a lot of my earlier books, published it. So, and actually, I have to say that the cover is beautiful. It's my favorite cover of all my books so far, and people seem to like it so far.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the fascination with Jean Harlow too. I mean, she passed away at 26, from what I understand.
Yes,
and she was one of like the top sex symbols in the 1930s. So you got to figure she was in her early 20s when she started doing the movies, I guess, with Howard Hughes, right? But then,
yeah, I think she was like like 18, and then she did a lot of, she started really doing those Laurel and Hardy comedy reels and stuff, and a lot of stuff like that. Yeah, she died. And then, she was the big first platinum blonde superstar. And then she died in, I think it was 1936. And it's sort of like she died and everything, quieted down. And then when Marilyn Monroe came along in the early 1950s as a new platinum blonde, it kind of made a resurgence in Jean Harlow. And Jean Harlow's mother, Mama Jean, was still alive, and her first agent, Arthur Landau. And both of them wanted to make a quick buck. So they were shopping around screenplays in the 1950s to the various studios, and the 20th Century Fox came close to doing the Jean Harlow story. And every other month in the trades, they would announce this Lee Remick's playing Jean Harlow, Stella Stevens playing Jean Harlow, Joanne Woodward's playing Jean Harlow, but it never came off. Nothing ever came of it. And then what happened was in 1964, screenwriter Irving Shulman, with input from Arthur Landau, released a biography about Harlow that was vilified by the critics. People who knew Jean Harlow hated it. They thought it was all lies, but it was trashy, and it was the bestseller on the New York Times. So it started again about making a movie about Jean Harlow because everyone's going to make a buck off of Jean Harlow. And again, it was 4 movie studios plus this independent company all saying they're going to do a Jean Harlow movie. And then when the dust cleared, it was Joe Levine at Paramount for a big Technicolor production with Carol Baker versus Joseph Sargent for his little company in black and white and with a new process called Electronovision, where it was shot like a live television show on kinescope and quickly transferred to film right then and there as they were shooting it with Carol Lindley. And so Joe Levine was irate that this little upstart would dare go against him, not only with a movie with the same exact title, about the same exact subject, but with leading ladies, both named Carol. So it was a big brouhaha. And they almost wound up in fisticuffs, almost, at the 1965 Academy Awards, where they both ran into each other. And Levine did not know it was Bill Sargent until after he shook his hand, and then they had to hold him back.
Now, the 2 movies that had come out, were they carbon copies of each other, or were they really done with very different approaches?
They're different screenwriters. The Carol Lindley Harlow uses it's MGM. It uses the real people's names. It uses the titles of her real movies. It sort of follows, the edited facts of her life. It goes from step 1 to step 2, step 3. It's not great, but at least it tries to show the truth. Carol Lindley is not completely successful, but a lot of it is the screenplay's fault. They don't show a happy Harlow unless she was a crew gal. They do have scenes of her with the crew playing dice and stuff, but with her personal life and stuff, she's always either mad or sad. The other one, they chickened out where they didn't want to get sued. So all the names of Harlow's movies are fictitious. The studio is fictitious. And even though he bought the rights to the book, Joe Levine, he just turned it into fiction. The story follows a little bit until the end, and at the end it just veers off completely. But it's beautiful. I mean, it's sumptuous. It's beautiful sets. I mean, it's in color, Technicolor. The score is beautiful. So it's candy coated trash. And it looks beautiful. The other one actually looks, because it's in that weird Electronovision, it looks like you're really watching a Jean Harlow movie from the 1930s with that grainy black and white feel to it and stuff.
Okay.
So both have their faults and everything, but I enjoy them both.
Were either of the movies big box office hits or not so much?
No, they wrote this, the Carol Lindley one came out in May and the Carol Baker one came out in June of both of 1965, and both of them were disappointments at the box office.
Okay. And you also wrote a book, a compendium about the soap opera Ryan's Hope.
Yeah, that was totally out of left field. Yes, I was a big Ryan's Hope fan, and now we're going into the 80s. In the 80s, when I started in college, I went to Nassau Community College on Long Island. And in my spring semester of 1980, I had a big gap between classes, so I would go to school. It was 3 days a week, and I would come home. I would stop and get lunch at the Burger King on Hempstead Turnpike, get up and go home. And one day I was just flipping through the channels, and it goes back to Carol Lindley, and I saw this beautiful blonde that looked like Carol Lindley, and she's spreading to some guy about she's afraid the mob is going to come and steal her beautiful Crystal Palace restaurant in Central Park because the mob boss was murdered. And I didn't know what the hell I was watching. And then when the credits rolled, I was like, Ryan's Hope. I'm like, that's a soap opera. So I started watching Ryan's Hope. And while my college friends at the time were all watching General Hospital, which I did not give a damn or a lick about Luke and Laura. I was watching, my Luke and Laura was Joe Novak, the reformed mobster, and Siobhan Ryan, the police officer. Their tortured love affair on Ryan's Hope. So, long story short, the show got canceled in '89. A friend of mine is an agent, and the blonde character owned the restaurant, and the character was Delia, and the actress who played her 3 different times was an actress named Eileen Kristen. And my friend, who was an agent, knew Eileen, and he introduced me to her on the streets. We ran into her on the streets in New York and everything, and I got to know Eileen, and she kept saying to me, you write all these interview books. Why don't you do a book about Ryan's Hope? She goes, it was such a groundbreaking soap, and all this stuff. And the co-creator was still alive at the time. This is like 2016, and then she died. And I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I could take a swing at it. And then I interviewed Eileen, and I interviewed a couple more actors, and it just sort of like my other books. It just grew and grew and grew. And I have this oral history of this soap opera, Ryan's Hope, that it was groundbreaking because I came to the party late. The show started in 1975. I started watching it in 1980. But in 1975, when it premiered, it was set in a real city, New York City. Most soap operas were not. They were in, fictitious towns like the West. It was about an Irish Catholic immigrant family who own and run a bar across the street from a hospital. And in the other soaps, they were usually just waspy, they were, middle class wasps, So this one had, and the religion, the Irish Catholic ethnicity of the characters were a big part of the show, especially at the first 5-6 years. And throughout the entire run, their big episode always was the St. Patrick's Day episode, not so much like Christmas. And every St. Patrick's Day, they would have a big, big party in their bar and stuff. So it was a little bit groundbreaking. And also it had, for 1975, it had there was no homemakers on that show. When that show first began, every single woman had a profession. Maeve O'Leary, she was the matriarch, but she ran the bar with her husband. The only character, Delia, was just this grasping, immature wife of one of the sons, but she was as far from a homemaker as you could get. So it wasn't like tea and, sit down and have some tea and let's talk about your problems. It was much different.
And I think that's really part of the evolution of all the soap operas, where really they start reflecting a lot of contemporary issues in society where, the older ones from like the 60s, they edited themselves, and said, oh, this doctor may be in love with this nurse.
And the old organ music and stuff. So. But what happened with Ryan's Hope, though, is when the 80s came, that hominess was sort of like pushed aside because the 80s were all glitz and glamour. And then in General Hospital took off with its Luke and Laura and their far-fetched plots like the Ice Princess and Freezing the World and stuff. And ABC, whatever was working on General Hospital, wanted to be copied on All My Children, One Life to Live, and Ryan's Hope and The Edge of Night. But it didn't really fit too much on Ryan's Hope because it was so specific. But the Godfather plot was realistic because it was set in New York City, and the mob runs rampant in New York. So that kind of caught on, and they ran with that for a number of years. And that's what drew me in, was that whole Godfather plot.
So with all the books that you've done, I mean, you've dealt with a lot of different genres, and obviously interviewed so many actresses and actors in your time as a writer. Is there one that got away? Is there one actor or actress that you would have loved to maybe have done a book about that you didn't get the opportunity to maybe even talk to?
There's a number of interviews that got away because at first I was a little I had some people like Marianne Mobley on, back and forth, that she kind of slipped out of my fingers. For Ryan's Hope, Marg Helgenberger, who went on to CSI in China Beach. I came so close to getting her, and it was just bad timing. That was a big one that slipped away. I'm trying to think. Well, with Carol Lindley, unfortunately, so I did do my book about Carol Lindley just before Ryan's Hope, and she did agree to speak with me as long as I wasn't doing a biography. She was fine if I was doing a career retrospective, but she wasn't going to talk to me about her love life or anything.
Okay.
And she died in the middle of it. We started. I interviewed her twice. I was cleaning up. It was during the summer. I said, let me go back and clean stuff up. Because she confirmed or denied various things that were written about her, in the press over the years, especially in regards to like movies, like, oh, Carol Lindley turned down blah, blah, blah. And she'd be like, no, I didn't turn it. I don't know. She goes, we had publicists would just throw shit out there,
Right.
just to get our names out there. And then she said, sometimes you're an actor and you're on a producer has a list of actresses or actors for a certain part. She goes, you don't know if you're on that list unless they contact your agent and then you actually get the script to read and stuff. So she goes, yeah, I could have been on some list, but like Bonnie and Clyde, she's always mentioned as being, she was one of the people that Warren Beatty considered for Bonnie and Clyde. She never knew she was considered for Bonnie and Clyde. She goes, I was never contacted by Warren Beatty. I never saw a script. In a biography about Warren Beatty, it mentions that he saw her as Jean Harlow, and he thought she had a really good, she had a good 30s look, and he was considering her for Bonnie and Clyde. So that's how she was considered for that. But she never knew that. She had no clue. So there's certain things like that. So that was disheartening when she died on me. And she actually was starting to get into the book because she wanted to approve the cover, but we never got to that part of it. And so that was sad. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I've, like Ryan's Hope book, and now I'm doing a book about this soap opera Texas. You write to people, you get emails and you don't hear anything back. Sometimes they just ignore you. I mean, I'd rather be told I respect more the people who just tell me no. It's like, thank you for contacting me, but I don't feel like talking about whatever. And that's better than just being totally ignored, which is a lot.
Well, welcome to my world as a podcaster, Tom.
Tell me no. I don't care. If you don't want to do it, just say fine. I'll move on. Just don't leave me in limbo.
Yeah. I just want to offer a comment. You had said about the cover of the Carol Lindley book. I think that picture that you have on the cover of her just really captures that screen presence of her. Those, like very angelic eyes, and she knew how to look terrified. It just came so natural to her, I think.
Yeah, I think that was the Carol Lindley. I picked that because that 1971, 72, 73 look, which was in The Night Stalker and The Poseidon Avenger. That's my discovery of Carol Lindley.
Yeah.
And she was very vulnerable and she was very sympathetic and with those big blue eyes and stuff. And it's funny because the Night Stalker, she had no idea it was going to be such a huge hit. She just thought it was a silly little vampire.
Yeah.
But she did it because she knew Darren McGavin and she liked him, and that's why she spent some time in Las Vegas, even though she despises gambling. But she went there, but she had no clue it was going to be what a huge ratings hit that was.
Sure. So before I let you go, could you let everybody know where they can find out find out a little bit about your work? And I'm going to publish all your links in the show notes so people can check it out. But if you want to let them know,
I have a website, 60cinema.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Where else am I? Not TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok. Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I respond to everybody. People send me things, DMs, emails and stuff. I always appreciate somebody taking time to write to me and ask me a question or say, "Oh, I liked your book." I always respond. The one thing I kind of would like to tell people, I kind of gently tell them, is telling me like on Facebook or email that you like my book is fine, and I really appreciate it. But for us writers, we need reviews. We need reviews on Amazon and good, because publishers, that's what publishers look to see. How many the reviews and how many people are actually buying it. So I try to gently ask people. I said, even if you just, even if you hate the book, it's just a review, right? Up there. So I always try to gently ask people. I try to push them to either Goodreads or Amazon or whatever. So, but yeah, it's easy to find me, and I'm very approachable.
Okay. And again, his latest book is Dueling Harlows, The Race to Bring this Actress's Life to the Silver Screen. Make sure if you're going to check it out, give him a nice review. Tom Lisanti, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get back to the Sherpa. Sorry about that. No!
Thanks so much to Tom Lisanti for swinging by the Sherpa Screening Room, and thanks to you for listening. You know what? I would advise you, if you're interested in this era of pop culture, to definitely go online and check out one of Tom's books, and of course, leave him a nice review. You can tell him that the Sherpa sent you. Yeah, that'll work. Well, it doesn't get me out of traffic tickets, but it'll work somehow. I know. Anyway, if you want to follow this show on social media, Sherpalution is the word that you will need for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, Twitter, whatever they're calling it this week. TikTok, I'm on there sometimes too. I'm kind of old for TikTok too, I know. And I don't know what else is on there. But I'm somewhere on there. And you can check out this show also on the Sherpalution YouTube page. I know it's picking up in popularity. I've been getting some great listens. Well, I can't say views because I'm not on the video. I have it standard. I don't know. Of a blank screen. So, again, thanks so much for swinging by. And we are barreling towards the season 12 finale. And who knows what we've got coming up? I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But until then, Lord Mr. Bruce, I believe it is time to head on out of here. So I say to you all, Viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa Screening Room. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast. I'm Mr. Bruce, and this has been a Sherpaloo Studios production. Viva la Sherpalution.